Hello everybody. So this video is entitled MSTR stock stretch is stretching back up, and it does take longer than I thought it would. Turns out that third attack really didn't help. Middle East tensions still unresolved. We had a few bad news, delays on the negotiation trips. All of this macro plus the third attack, in my view, is the reason why we are not bouncing back as fast as we should. But we will get back to 100. I mean, we are now close. We are now a quarter away from 100. Will it be this evening or will it be Monday? Maybe Monday at this point. So Stretch is still extremely successful. I'll get to that in a second. Stretch is infiltrating TradFi and DeFi, and that's a pretty big deal. Let's talk about strategy. Likely ATMing. My guess is that they ATM'd this week. You may remember MNAB actually reached 1.3, and we dropped back to 1.25 as I record this video. So probably ATM'd yesterday, probably ATM'd today. Unfortunately, we've had fairly uneventful Bitcoin price action. I mean, Bitcoin goes through these long phases where it behaves like a stable coin, and this is one such phase. And so of course we're all waiting to break back above 80k, and to me that will happen when the general market calms down, when we actually get a resolution in the Middle East. Now you will notice that the market is becoming more numb to the Middle East headline, more numb. I have noticed myself that the market is becoming more numb to the price of oil, much more than it was, 3 weeks ago when the market entirely freaked out. So I think this is slowly getting better, and I think April is going to shape up to be a really good month. We'll see when we measure it at the end of the month. Okay, talk about Stretch. I really want to talk about Stretch. That's where I have updates. Stretch is scaling quite a bit. Look at this from Strategy this morning. Stretch raised $8.5 billion in 9 months, 5.5 times faster than Strategy's first $8.4 billion raise in the early days. So Stretch is growing 5 times as fast as MSTR was growing. Now, if you follow Strategy, you know that this company considers equity, MSTR equity, STRC preferred equity. This company treats its equity like the product. The equity is the product. That's a fundamental difference with any other business who tries to not sell equity, who tries to buy back equity in order to increase their stock price. This is not how Strategy does it. Strategy sells more equity to increase the stock price. Right, and such that if you look at Strategy, Strategy, at its peak, it went from 1 billion to 100 billion, right? 1 billion to 100 billion, but the stock price only did a 33x or 32x. So even though the market cap 1000x, the stock price only 30x. But that's okay. That's okay. That's perfectly fine. You're behaving like a black hole, and so that's why I really hope he's ATMing right now. If he's selling $100, he's selling into for 125. We accrete. It's accretive dilution, which is a crazy word, but it is. That's how it works. So, anyways, Stretch is scaling 5 times faster. That's a pretty big deal. And why is it scaling so fast? Well, look. You have APYX. APYX, of course, is one of the bigger protocols out there. Roxcom is also a pretty big protocol out there. They offer STRC. Tweeting yesterday, Saylor tweeting, Saturn, another protocol, 33 million purchased in STRC. So you have 3 DeFi protocols that are mainstream, and I know there's more of them. I don't know all of them. These are the 3 that I know of. I know there's more of them, perhaps smaller. Not perhaps, for sure smaller, but these are the big ones, and they're scaling Stretch into the digital finance ecosystem, into what Saylor has been caught calling on interviews lately staking networks. Right? He calls the Solanas, the Ethereums of the world. He calls them staking networks. Right? So Stretch is infiltrating the DeFi world or the staking network world, and people are are tokenizing the stretch equity. And of course, this is part of a much bigger story, by the way, where all of the equities will eventually be tokenized. Like, I don't know if you saw, for example, if you follow Hyperliquid, which is kind of a blockchain I'm studying right now, Hyperliquid made a bunch of money and a bunch of fees with Intel during Intel's big spike the other day, because Hyperliquid was the only thing that was open. And so MSTR stock, the stock itself, is also going to get flows from being tokenized, right? And as tokenization takes off, MSTR stock is also going to take flows. So, I would be ready for actually some MNAV expansion due to the fact that MSTR stock is going to go to the DeFi markets and to the staking networks, right? And of course, Gen Z, Gen Alpha don't want to have anything to do with interactive brokers or TradFi brokers. They don't want none of that. They want to deal on chain. They want everything on chain. They want their tokens in self-custody on chain. So that's going to be a big deal. Okay, so it's penetrating the DeFi world, right, through these instruments, and also there's new instruments being built in the TradFi world. So Stretch is also infiltrating the TradFi world. So of course, so I don't know the ticker on Amsterdam in Europe, but there's a 21 shares ETP of STRC in Europe, trading for like $20. So I don't really know how you access STRC in Europe, but some people seem to be able to do it, and 21 shares seems to be one of the avenues for that. So that's a big deal. And then in the US, we have another ETF coming, which is the Strive and Total. The Total company, they are on top of all of the ETFs. Every time there's something hot, they make an ETF out of it. Whatever. You know I like pure form assets no matter what. I've never been a fan of ETFs, right? I've always been against, say, like MSTX, for example. A bunch of people were about that. I've always been very much against it. I don't like ETFs. I'm all about you gotta own the pure asset. But some people like ETFs. I think this one's going to be a nice deal, because if you have Stretch and SATA, a lot of people are going to be like, okay, well, I don't want to deal with complexity. I want to own Stretch and SATA. Of course, owning an ETF like this in a taxable account would be a terrible mistake, because you wouldn't get the tax deferred benefit, right? But if you have a retirement account, you don't care about the tax deferred benefit. So it has a use case, right? It has a use case. Watch for the fees. I don't know what the fees are going to be on that. Watch for the fees. And also, if you look at the iShares preferred, which I just did, which, by the way, horrible UI UX on that website. Like, you gotta go for a spreadsheet. The spreadsheet calls it MSTR, but you can tell from the stock price that they don't own MSTR, they own STRC. Anyways, PFF owns all, from what I can see, all of the preferred except Stream, but they own all of the preferred of MSTR, including Stretch. From what I'm guessing, looking at the Excel spreadsheet, based on the price that they inputted in there. But yeah, they own it. Terrible UI, by the way. Terrible UI looking at the holdings of PFF. Oh. Anyways, so it's infiltrating yield instruments on TradFi. ETF yield instruments on TradFi. That's a very, very big deal. So that's why STRC is scaling so fast. It's taking over TradFi, and it's taking over DeFi, or, staking networks. And lastly, I'll conclude with this, and I have another slide after this, but quickly. SETA yesterday, so some people follow SETA. SETA yesterday ATM for the second time in a row. Today at ATM for the second time in a row. Yesterday they ATM'd, I think, a few hundred Bitcoins actually. SETA doing well. SETA breaking 100. Now, this trad folks would call SETA validation, competition. They would call it competition. I don't call it competition. I call it validation. It's validation of a concept that I think a lot of the DATs are going to get behind. And also, why is it not competition? Why is SETA not competing against MSTR? Because let me know, they are both buying Bitcoin. So if SETA is successful, if Strive is successful, if all of the DATs are successful, MSTR will be successful by virtue of the fact that they own the most of the finite Bitcoins. They own the most Bitcoin, right? think about it. Think about it as whenever you have somebody buying Bitcoin, whether it's your enemy or your friend, whenever somebody buys Bitcoin, they help you because it's like they do a buyback. They reduce the number of people owning Bitcoin. They help you, and this is especially true for DATs. This is especially true for preferreds, where they will never sell. They don't. Well, you don't know that, right? There could be trouble, but they don't want to sell. They don't want to. Like if Bitcoin goes to zero, everything collapses, and sure they'll sell. But that's not how it works when they go into this, right? Saylor is the biggest maxi out there. Saylor has the biggest diamonds hands. Do you think this guy's gonna sell? Do you think Saylor's gonna sell? No way. I don't think there's a single way Saylor's gonna sell. Saylor will ride MSTR to either the largest company in the world or to zero, because he's not afraid of losing everything, because he's already lost everything one time in the .com crash. So anyways. And of course, a lot of Bitcoiners, right? A lot of classic Bitcoiners, when they buy Bitcoin, they buy it forever, right? You even have this trend in Bitcoin of saying, well, when I die, my keys will die with me, and therefore I'm making a donation to the world. I'm making a donation to the network. I mean, and that's what Saylor's going to do too, right? Saylor in early interviews used to say that, he's going to burn his keys when he dies and give it as a donation to the network, as a donation to humanity. So anyways, fascinating stuff. I'll conclude with this. Notice anything. Fong Li tweeted that yesterday. The volume on Stretch is the same as the volume on MSTR. If this keeps going, and this is very in line with what Saylor has said, if this keeps going, Stretch is going to be a bigger instrument than MSTR. Because the credit market are bigger than the equity market. The credit market, if you look at all of the $900 trillion of asset, look at the Bitcoin 24 model that you can get on GitHub, I think. Just look Bitcoin 2024 model, which is the MSTR model. If you look at that model, the credit market is about 3 times as big. So to me, it makes a lot of sense that Stretch could actually become a bigger instrument than MSTR. So, right now we're in a phase where the BTC rating is mostly maintained through MSTR actually issuing also a bunch of MSTR common stock in order to maintain the BTC rating. But I could see a future where imagine you have Bitcoin. Imagine you have Bitcoin growing at 30%, and imagine Stretch's yield gets back to 8%. Well, in that situation, you could potentially keep the BTC rating without really ATMing any MSTR. Right, that would be enough. Because you would grow the collateral by 30%, and then you would deplete it by 8%, which would be your yield. It doesn't require that much of a yield drop on Stretch to actually keep the collateral, right? And of course, what's gonna lead to the yield being dropped on Stretch? Eventually, it's gonna be the interest rates dropping. And the interest rates, in my view, are going to drop, right? Bullish news about the DOJ dropping the investigation on Powell. Why is this bullish news? Because a lot of people were calling for Powell to stay at the Fed while this investigation goes on. So now that there's no more investigation, it opens the door for the new Fed chair. So anyways, I'm quite bullish. I'm very, very bullish. And of course, When I say these companies will never sell, keep in mind, of course, that this is predicted. Like everything, like all of this collapses if Bitcoin fails, right? Bitcoin cannot fail. If Bitcoin fails, all of this fails. Every video that I make about Bitcoin is contingent on Bitcoin winning and Bitcoin being digital gold and Bitcoin being digital capital. If you don't agree with this premise, you have no business getting near these instruments if you don't agree with the premise. And, of course, it's a very tough premise to get to because, we used to say it takes about, 10,000 hours to understand Bitcoin. Today with AI, you can probably understand Bitcoin much faster, maybe 500 hours, maybe less than that, but it still takes a significant amount of time to understand Bitcoin. Much less than it used to back 5 years ago when you had to actually read the books and all that sort of stuff. But anyways, Hopefully you find this video helpful. This was not investment advice. This is not financial advice. This is only entertainment. I'm hoping you were entertained. Please like, please subscribe, follow me on Patreon, follow me on X. Thank you for watching, and have a wonderful, wonderful day.